Dear students, today we are going to discuss something very significant about the prison we broke. And if once you are able to go through this video, if once you are able to listen this video, see this video, pause it and take the screenshot, your answers are going to be very extraordinary. Because what I'm going to do here is those specific issues and with the quotes from the text. We are going to talk here about Baby Kambli's The Prison We Broke. So you might find that it's not very explanatory because we are talking about the specific codes. So, but still, relevant uh, explanations will be given. So now let's start. The self-reflexivity in Baby Kamble is The Prison We Broke, a phenomenological approach with important quotes from the text. In her memoir, The Prison We Broke, Baby Kamble highlights the historical and systematic discrimination faced by Mahar women, particularly contrasting their treatment with high social standing of Brahmin or Peshwa women. She also describes the brutal treatment of Mahar daughter-in-laws within their own community, which was often redirected from the form of oppression they faced from the high caste. Discriminations by high caste Brahmin Peshwa women. Now, in this year, you will find that the daughter-in-law specifically will be having more focus on daughter-in-laws also, and that the discussion of daughter-in-law also take us to intersectionality, discrimination within discrimination. So the daughter-in-law are again brutalized and brutally discriminated by mother-in-laws, and the mother-in-law is also from Mahar community. So how even the uh, intersectional, the women are again doubly, triply marginalized and suppressed in the same community. They are facing discrimination from high caste that is already evidentical. Now, discrimination by high caste Brahmin Peshwa women. Kamble vividly describes how high caste women maintained strict pollution barriers when interacting with Mahar women, specifically when the latter came to sell firewood in the Brahmin lane. And this is a quote from the text. The Brahmin Kaki, sitting in the cool shade and supervising this operation, would keep shouting instructions after instruction. Listen carefully, you dumb Mahar women. Check the sticks well. If you overlook any of the threads sticking to the wood, there will be a lot of trouble. But what's that to you? Your carelessness will cost us heavily. Our houses will get polluted. Then we will have to polish the floor with cow dung and wash all our clothes, even the rags of the house. Such trouble we will have to undergo for your foolishness. And how will the gods tolerate this? Tell me. They too will be polluted, won't they? So here, actually, when this Mahar woman, they have gone to the, uh, nearby jungle and they have collected firewood to, uh, to give it to this Peshwa lady, and in return of that, the Mahar woman would be getting food and whatever, reward is being given. So while giving this firewood collection, the the Peshwa Kaki is asking her to look at everything, every single stick, and see whether her hair, the hair of a Mahar woman is stuck in the firewood or not. Because if while they are cooking, and if they find that the hair has come, this, sticking one hair of a Mahar woman um, uh, to the stick would pollute the house of this Peshwa Kaki and this house of Peshwa, and then finally they have to go for to pure the house. That's what the process is being given. So to avoid the, recognition of the labor of Mahar women, uh, I mean, uh, I think this Peshwa Kaki must be thankful to the lady that somebody is going to the jungle collecting the firewood, and then it is offered to the doorstep. So do not to recognize this service, they are being, how this mental subjugation is there. So that's this dialogue again you can read out and you can interpret. Now, brutality against Mahar daughter-in-law. The text explained that the extreme violence within the Mahar community, such as chopping off a daughter-in-law's nose, closing the gateway for the woman to exist outside endogamous structure, was a manifestation of the ignorance and superstition enforced by the upper caste to keep the Mahar community controlled and divided. Systematic ignorance. KAMBE notes that the upper caste purposely denied knowledge to Mahar people, leading them into a cycle of internal violence. She writes, just as the farmer pierces his bullock's nose and insert a string through the nostril to control it, you have pierced the Mahar nose with the string of ignorance. The nose chopping incident in the broader context of memoir, calmly describes how a daughter-in-law who failed to show due respect to high caste master by bowing would cause all hell to break loose. The community fearing the masters, Reggae would vent uh, their wrath on girl, while while the snippet mentioned the master's threat that no mercy would be shown to you any longer. The complete text of the memoir detail how these perceived transgression often led to the horrific practice of a husband or father-in-law chopping of the young woman's nose to save the family honor in the eyes of the village master, and how daughter-in-law suffer. Although daughter-in-law is also from the Mahar community, but how this intersectionality or double marginalization, triple marginalization is there. And the quote: "In the prison we broke, Baby Kamli describes horrific treatment of young daughter-in-law as a cycle of slavery within slavery." So you just note down this point: slavery within slavery, and she explains that because Mahar women were so oppressed by the upper caste, they often turned that frustration and powerlessness onto the only person lower than them in the household, and that was the new daughter-in-law. That's a girl, young girl, ignorant girl, and powerless girl. So the mother-in-law would be very brutal and cruel to this daughter-in-law. And the following quote illustrates how a mother in law would instigate her son to commit this act of violence to prove his masculinity and the family's honor. The mother in law would go to instigating the son. The mother in law will go on The mother-in-law will go on instigating, would go on instigating the son. What kind of a man are you? Your wife has no fear of you. Look how she talks back. If I were in your place, I would have cut off her nose and handed it over to her. A woman must be kept under the foot, only then will she behave. The son goaded by his mother's words and wanting to prove his manhood, would then lose his temper. He would grab the woman by her hair, pin her down, and with a sharp knife or a slice or a sickle, slice off her nose. The mother-in-law would then stand over her, gloating, "No, go to your father's house with that face. Let everyone see what happened to a woman who doesn't listen to her husband." Sharmila Rege calls the intersectionality of the caste and gender, the psychological aspect, the mother-in-law who has been humiliated by the Peshwa, upper caste. Uh, Woman all day tries to reclaim the sense of a power by controlling the daughter-in-laws. The nose as honor in this context, the nose is a symbol of izzat. By cutting it, the man were not just pushing, punishing the woman, but making her as dishonorable to the entire village. In the prison we broke, Baby Kamble provides a harrowing and graphic description of childbirth in the Mahar community, which she portrays. That is how this graphic description of the childbirth in the Mahar community, which she portrays as a period of extreme physical torture and medical neglect enforced by superstition and poverty. Because Mahar women were considered untouchable, they were often forced to give birth to the darkness, dumpest, and most isolated corner of the huts and away from the purity of the main living space. The brutal ritual of childbirth, physical torture to speed up labor. Kamble describes how, in the absence of medical care, older women in the community would use violent physical force on the young girl in labor. They would They would make the girl stand, and two strong women would hold her arm, while another would push her stomach with all her might. If the labor was if the labor was long, they would say the girl was being stubborn, or that an evil spirit was blocking the child. They would even resort to kicking her on or hitting her to force the baby out. So this is how it's a combination of lack of medical help and a cocktail of that superstition, where some unknown spirit is blocking the childbirth, and finally the girl is, or the mother, the newly mother, a pregnant daughter-in-law is suffering to the extreme. The absence of hygiene, the childbirth room, the birthing room was usually a small suffocating space with no ventilation. The poor girl would be lying on a heap of old filthy rags. There was no clean water, no medicine to stop the bleeding or treat the pain. They would use hot ash or branding irons. The smoke from the small fire kept inside for warmth would choke the mother and the newborn. The lack of nutrition. After the ritual of the birth was over, the suffering didn't end. The mother was often denied proper food. And this is the quote from the text. For days after the birth, the mother was given only a thin gruel and dry bread. They believed that if she ate well, she would become unclean again too quickly. She had to return to her hard labor in the field or carrying wood just as few days after giving birth, even while her body was still broken and bleeding. In the prison we broke, Baby Kamble provides a visceral account of the Asutika, that is postnatal period. This passage also often used by scholars like Sharmila Rege to illustrate how poverty and untouchability turned the biological process into a scene of horror, the pit and the blood. Kamble describes the primitive and unsanitary condition forced upon Mahar women because they were not allowed to let polluted birth floods touch the main earth or be seen by others. A small pit would be dug in the corner of the dark dump room. It was meant to soak up all the blood and refuse of the childbirth. The poor woman would be made to sit over this pit. There was no concept of clean bandage or cloth. The blood just drained into the earth. The stench in that tiny, unventilated room would become unbearable, but the woman had to stay there for days, treated like an outcast within her own home. The lack of medical knowledge, the midwife. Without access to hospital or trained doctor, the community really relied on elderly women whose examinations were often painful and dangerous. And I quote, the midwife, with her long, dirty fingernails and hands covered in the grime of daily labor, would repeatedly thrust her fingers into the girl's vagina to check the progress. There was no oil, no cleanliness. They would poke and prod the internal organ of the laboring girl so brutally that she would scream in agony. But her screams were ignored as the common part of being a woman. Starvation after childbirth. Kamble highlights the absolute lack of nutrition, which often led to death of mother or child shortly after birth. I think these whole paragraphs doesn't need any explanation, and we are trying to read out the text itself. So let's enjoy the textual, the reading the text pleasure. Now, Kamble highlights the absolute lack of nutrition, which often led to death of a mother or a child shortly after birth. And what did the mother get to eat after such a breaking ordeal? Nothing. For the first few days, she was lucky if she got a few drops of water or a thin uh, decoction of bitter herb. There was no milk, no ghee, no nourishing food. She would lie there, her stomach stuck to her back in the hunger, while the body tried to produce milk for the newborn. If she was lucky on the third day, she might be given a piece of dry bakari, that is flat bread soaked in water. This was the celebration. In the prison we broke, Kamble used these specific details to show that poverty of the Mar community was not just lack of money, but the total loss of human dignity. These image of the half-washed sari and lack of utensil are famous in Dalit literature for illustrating the extreme scarcity of resources. Half-washed sari. Because the woman owned only one single piece of cloth, the sari they were wearing, and had no change of the clothes. They had to be incredibly resourceful just to stay clean. A Mahar woman had only one sari to her name, and that too was full of patches. When she went to the river to wash it, she couldn't stand naked, so she would tuck one end of the sari around her waist, wash the other half in the water, and spread it out on a rock to dry while still wearing the wet half. Once that half was dry, she would switch, wearing the dry part and washing the remaining wet half. This was how she bathed and cleaned, tucked between her poverty and her modesty. No utensil, no clothes to wash. Kamli describes the household so empty that the very concept of housework, like washing dish and laundry, cleaning, didn't exist because there was nothing to own. And this is from the text. What was there in a Mahar house to wash or clean? There were no utensil of brasses or copper to be scrubbed with the tamarind and ash. Perhaps there was a single broken earthen pot for water and a few coconut shells for drinking. There were no piles of clothes to be laundered. For the rags, they would stay on their bodies until they fell apart. The housework of a Mar woman was not about cleaning her home, but about wandering in the field to find something, anything, to fill the empty stomach of her children. This is how the condition is there. The rare festival bath. Kamli describes how children were only given a proper bath during major festival like Akshaya, Tritiya, or Holi. For the rest of the year, they remained covered in dust. For months together, the children's bodies could not touch a single drop of water. Only when a festival arrived did the mother find the time or the mind to bathe them. The children would be scrubbed with the piece of a rough stone to get the thick layer of dirt of their skin. The mothers would rub oil, usually some cheap rinsed oil, into the dry, matted hair until their scalps shone. For that one day, they looked like human children. The rest of the year, they were just creatures of the dust. Lice, head, and the clothes. Kamble provides the graphic description of how lices were constant companions of the community. They explain that killing lice became a social activity for women because they were so overwhelmed by them. Their hair was a breeding ground for lice. Huge fat lice would crawl openly on the children's head and even on their clothes. You could see the lice moving on the blanket and the rags they slept on. The woman would sit in the sun picking lice from each other's hair or from the fold of their tattered saris. They would crack lice between their fingernails. The tuck tuck sound of the killing lice was a constant background noise in our settlement. The naked children. She vividly depicts the sight of naked, malnourished children playing the dirt, which was standard image of a Mahar settlement. Group of completely naked children, their bellies blotted with the hunger and their limbs thin like sticks, would spend the whole day playing in the mounds of the dust and garbage. These nange bacche, naked children, knew no shame, for they had never known the comfort of a piece of cloth. Their noses would be running, and the dried snot would be smeared across their faces, mixed with soil of the earth. To the upper caste passing by, they were just an eyesore, but to as they were the head cover and the abuse during the procession. Kamble describes how the community would watch the daughter-in-law during village festival. If a girl had become uncovered because her sari was too short or she was tired, she was publicly shamed. During the procession, during the procession During the procession, these young daughter-in-laws had to walk with their heads bowed low, their faces completely veiled, but their saris were so old and so that it was impossible to keep the head cover while walking. If a girl's pallu slipped even an inch, the older woman and the man would fall upon her with filthy abuses. You shameless slut, you are trying to show your face to the whole village. Have you no shame left? They would treat her as if she had committed a great crime, even though it was her poverty, the short sari, that was at fault. Physical abuse as training. The mother in law often viewed the daughter in law as a laborer who needed to be broken in like an animal. The daughter in law was treated The daughter-in-law was treated worse than a beast of burden. From 4 in the morning until late at night, she had to toil. If she showed even a hint of exhaustion, the mother-in-law would scream, "Why are you sitting there like a queen? Your father didn't send a dowry of gold, did he? Get up and work. I will have my son peel the skin off your back." The caste gender intersections of abuse. Kamble highlights that while the entire community was oppressed by the upper caste, the daughter in law was at the very bottom of the ladder, receiving the leftover anger of everyone else. When Mahar men were insulted by the high caste, when Mahar men were insulted by the high caste landlords in the morning, they would they would come home and vent that suppressed rage on their wives. The wives in turn would vent their frustration on the young daughter-in-law. She was the final destination for all the bitterness and humiliation that the caste system heaped upon our people. She was the slave of slaves. Food deprivation in daughter-in-law use was often the last to eat, usually receiving only burnt remain or watery liquid from the bottom of the pot. After serving everyone, the daughter in law would look into the pot only to find it nearly empty. She would scrape the burnt crust from the bottom and swallow it within a little water. If she dares to ask for more, she was accused of being gluttonous and eating the family out of their home. Her hunger was never acknowledged. She was expected to live on air and abuse thrown at her. In the prison we broke, Baby Kamble provides some of the most searing accounts of how Mahar women were treated not just as untouchables but as the lowest of the low by the upper caste society. The exploitation was physical, economic, and psychological. Here are the quotes from the exclusion and the pollution distance. And the most common from the abuse was the constant reminder that their presence was filth. Kamble describes the humiliation of selling firewood in the high caste lands. So this we have already done. Then sari. The high caste master exploit our bodies until we were broken. Our women work in their field and sunrise to the from sunrise to sunset in this scorching heat. And what did they get? A few pieces of stale, a fungus-covered bhakri bread. If a woman dared to ask for more, the landlord would abuse her parents and her caste, saying, "You Mahar are born to eat out leftover. Be grateful you are getting even this." So public humiliation, the yashkaras, and the customary duty. Mahar women were often forced to perform free labor for the village, that is wet begari. Kamble knows how even when they worked was monitored by the upper caste. When Mahar woman walked through the village, she had to keep her head down and tuck her sari between her legs in a specific way, the kacha style, so as not to look like the upper caste woman. If she looked too clean or wore her sari too well, she was immediately abused by high caste men. Look at this Maharani. Forget your place. Have you? They would use the foulest language to remind her that she was nothing but a slave to the village. The body as the site of violence. Kamble highlights that while upper caste women were protected inside their house, Mahar women were exposed to the lust and violence of the high caste man in field with no one to protect them. For the upper caste man, the Mahar woman was untouchable when it came to food or water, but she was not untouchable when he wanted to satisfy is lust in the darkness of the field. If she resisted, her husband was beaten and her family was kicked out of the village. This was the greatest. This was the greatest exploitation. Our touch was polluting in the sunlight, but desirable in the dark. Abuse and exploitation of daughter-in-law. Marriage and early labor. Girls were married off at the very tender age, often young as 8 and 9, and immediately thrust into grueling labor in the household of the prestigious Mahar of the 16th share. A young daughter in law was kept busy 24 hours a day, performing arduous tasks like cutting and preserving large quantities of meat. The struggle of survival, making bakri and finding food. The daily life of a Mar woman was not about traditional housework, but of constant struggle for the survival. They often had no utensil and lived in extreme poverty. Daughter-in-laws was expected to toil from the morning until late at night, and if she showed exhaustion, she was verbally abused and threatened with physical violence by her mother-in-law. Childbirth and medical neglect. Childbirth was a battle with that due to mother's young age and lack of medical care. Mothers often had no food, not even rice water after giving birth, and had to tie up their bodies to cope with hunger. The ignorant midwives would inflict further pain and injury through the rough internal examination, public humiliation, and nose chopping. The community enforced a strict rule of modesty and respect towards upper caste. If a young daughter in law failed to bow correctly, or if her head became uncovered during the procession, she was publicly shamed and her family was subjected to the wrath of the village master. This community pressure often translate into internal violence, and a husband or a mother-in-law slice off a woman's nose as a punishment for being impudent or to save the family's honor. The social isolation and abuse. The daughter-in-law was the final destination of the for all the bitterness and humiliations in the caste system heaped upon the Mar community. Men who were insulted by landlords during the day would often vent their suppressed rage on their wives and daughter-in-laws at home. The Prison We Broke baby Kamble and later Sharmila Rege in her analysis of the book illustrate that Dalit women are crushed under the three distinct layers of oppression: caste from the outside, class, poverty, and patriarchy from within. Here are the specific quotes from the triple description uh, and the internal abuse by Mahar man. The double curse of patriarchy. Calmly explained, while Mahar men were slaves at the high caste, they acted like a master at home, creating a cycle of redirected violence. The Mahar man was a slave to the high caste during the day. He had to bow, scrap, and take their insult within a word. But when he come to home at night, he brought all the suppressed anger within him. He would find the smallest excuse: the bakri was cold, the water was late, and he would beat his wife mercilessly. It was as if by crushing his wife, he was trying to prove to himself that he was still a man, even if the world treated him like a dog. The intersections of the caste and gender, uh, that is triple description. Sharmila Reke often cites this passage to show how a Mahar woman body was site of the triple exploitation. A Mahar woman's life was also a piece of wood caught between two stones. On one side was the heavy stone of the high caste who exploited her labor and her body in the field. On the other side was a stone of her own husband and father-in-law who demanded a total submission. And surrounding it all was the biting wind of the poverty and left her with no food and only half a sari to cover her shame. She was not just an untouchable, she was untouchable among untouchables. Now, systematic domestic abuse. Kamli describes the normalcy of the violence in Maharwada settlement. And I quote, in our settlement, a day without the sound of a woman screaming was a rare day. The man believed it was their the birthright to beat their wives. They would use whatever was in their hands, a stick, stone, or even the finger, a fire stone. The community elder would watch and say, "A husband is a god. If he beat her, it must be for her own good." The woman had nowhere to run because the outside world was even more dangerous for an untouchable woman. Sexual exploitation, that is double standard. This code was showed high hypocrisy of the caste system where pollution only applied to food, not to the abuse of women's body. The high caste landlords would not drink water touched by a Mahar woman, but he would not hesitate to drag her into the sugarcane field at noon. And if the woman returned home crying, her own husband would often blame her, saying she was must have lured the master. She was abused by the master of being a mahar and abused by her husband for being a woman. This was her fate, to be exploited by everyone and protected by no one. Now, the casting the body. Focus how a physical body is used to mark social status. The upper caste had kept us in such deep ignorance that we worship. the very chains that binds. We were told that our dharma was to carry the dead animals and eat remain, and we did so with a sense of duty. The Brahmanical patriarchy, required the production of the chaste woman and construction of the impure Dalit woman. The purity. A husband who was kicked by a landlord in the morning would come home and kick his wife in the evening. He couldn't fight the master, so he mastered the only person weaker than him. Now, a woman without a nose was a map of a community's honor. It was a warning written on flash. Do not defy the man, for they are the only master we have left. Dalit women's narrative challenged the mainstream feminist idea of universal sisterhood by showing that the Dalit household is also a site of patriarchal terror. Why does the mother-in-law participate in this abuse? That is internalized Brahmanism. Ambedkar uh, Ambedkar said, I measure the progress of community by the degree of progress which women have achieved. And here, Baba Sahib told us to stop wearing the heavy brass ornaments that mark us an animal. He said, wash our face, wear your sari like human being, and send your daughters to the school. In the moment, he didn't just give us a speech, he gave us a face. So there is a table of summary, and you can see this. Let's understand this table of summary. Uh, pause the this pause this table, and it would be easy for you to understand these concepts. I'm just making it in one page, so you can see this table is there. So now I just pausing it, I'm posing it here, and just you look at the summary of the table. So concepts are poverty, childbirth, violence, and resistance, and how Baby Kamble is dealing it in House Sharmila Rege. So poverty, according to Baby Kamble, the half-wash sari, Sharmila Rege, elementary and material casteism. Childbirth, as per by Baby Kamble, the pit of blood, and Sharmila Rege is the politics of exclusion. Concept is violence, and it is being dealt by Baby Kamble in the form of chopped nose, and in the form Sharmila Rege talk about is maintenance of caste gateways. Resistance is the concept, and then it is dealt by Baby Kamble as obscene language. Sharmila Rege's theory, subversive counterculture. So I stop here. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for watching. Share it, and like